Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mihi nui ke koutou. Tēnā hoki koutou I te mana whenua, e Ngāti Gadigal, nō reira, kia ora hui hui tātou, taro whalava and greetings one and all. To the Gadigal people of the ACOSS Nation, on whose ancestral lands the city of Sydney is built, I respectfully acknowledge you and the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. And to all those present today at this gathering, greetings in Māori, in English and in Samoan. I am just so pleased to be here, and I hope you're all well, you're doing all right after that delicious lunch that we had, and thank you very much too for the warmth of the welcome here. This is actually a very, very important forum, and it was tremendous to be listening this morning. This is a forum focused on turning the tide on child poverty in Australia. So my congratulations and thanks to ACOSS for bringing the group together, for making it possible for me to be here, to NAB for this amazing venue, and to Early Childhood Australia. I have been looking out the window a little bit because being up this high actually reminded me of some things that my mother said to me when I was leaving home, first of all. And she said, darling, when you go to a new place, go somewhere high, because then you can get the perspective of all the things that need to be done when you are down where the work needs to be done. And then go down and work. So I have been thinking about my mum while I've been listening to everyone here. I am deeply motivated to see that when we talk about education for all, we do mean all. When we talk about justice for all, we do mean all. And that means for all of our children. So I'm going to speak about child poverty and solutions to child poverty. I'll be speaking about New Zealand approaches to reducing child poverty, and seeing as it's post-lunch, I'll be relaxing my economics and analyst side and sharing a few stories. I'm very, very happy to do the numbers and to go through the 78 recommendations from the report I'll be referring to, and to do that in detail at another day. I'm very happy to do that. I do, though, have 6 suggested actions for turning the tide on child poverty, and this forms the framework for my time with you. The first of these is to make the decision that child poverty is preventable. The second is about definitions, to agree on a shared definition of child poverty. The third is about strengths, to adopt a strengths-based approach to the work we do for reducing child poverty. The fourth is about strengthen communities in education. The fifth is to listen to the children. And the sixth is to create a national strategy to turn the tide on child poverty. So I'll set the scene first, introducing some work done recently in New Zealand on reducing child poverty, and then I'll pass through each of the 6 action areas for policy shaping before closing off with a poem. So, setting the scene. I am here as a friend. It's okay about the America's Cup now, and that Australian skipper on that other boat. I'm here because we have things in common, our history and our present. I recognise, though, that we are the same but different. I'm here in case it's possible we can help each other and help our futures for our children. You see, we like to believe that Australia, the lucky country, and New Zealand, God's own, are great places for children. And for most children, this is indeed true. But it's not true for children living in poverty. Almost 600,000, not the 60,000, the 600,000 children in Australia live in poverty. That's about the 1 in 6. And that's about enough to fill Stadium Australia 7 times. 7. Stadium Australia, just with children. In my country, we're actually doing worse. As many as 25% of New Zealand's children, 1 in 4, it's about 270,000 for us, currently live in poverty. And most of those children are living in Auckland, where I live. In New Zealand each year, there is about $6 billion in additional health and education costs associated with child poverty, as well as reduced productivity. So our Trans-Tasman figures compare unfavourably with those of many European countries, but they also don't match the values on which our nations are built. We stand up. We stand up for what's right. We take on battles when odds are against us, and we win. Our Anzac history says we can take this one on, and that we will step up for our children in Australia and New Zealand. Yet finding actions that will get results is not simple. How can we make Australia and New Zealand great places to live for all our children? Well, yes, last year I had the sad honour of being invited by New Zealand's Children's Commissioner to join the expert advisory group charged with providing solutions to child poverty. And when Dr. Russell Wills phoned me, I stood up for the call. It sounded to me like I was being called to serve my country. And I went into this group as an educationalist with some understanding that child poverty happened in New Zealand, but I was surprised by the extent to which it exists. I went in pitching for education as the solution above all things, and then found that it was also about strategy, tax credits, child support, employment skills, housing, problem debt, health and disability, local context and local communities and family, the justice system, research and evaluation, needs for Māori children, needs of Pacifica children. And I realised it's actually going to take something more like a combination lock to undo this, rather than a single key into a padlock. I also realised that in addition to these issue areas, we have some specifics to do with geography, of locating where most children are in New Zealand. And that was an important policy framing for us. So it was good work to do, but difficult. It's like Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. New Zealanders were very active in responding to the information that came out, irritated by child poverty, and sometimes irritating in their responses. Comments ranged from shame on New Zealand and us all, to blame the government, blame the landlords, blame the teachers, blame the sole parents, to penalise or even sterilise low-income parents who, as one correspondent called it, the low-income parents who breed. Most, though, said, this is enough. We are better than this. Hundreds, including children, contributed to the expert advisory report, and overall it was clear that action is needed now. No child should experience severe and persistent poverty, least of all in a land of plenty. And so from this experience, I come to my first action. The first being to decide that child poverty is preventable. One of the things we did as the expert advisory group was that we brought together the hard evidence about child poverty and well-being in New Zealand. And I've heard this morning of people and organisations who are doing likewise. And we found a situation that is real, serious and urgent. And I've seen this afternoon, and I've heard this morning similarly. We realised from an evidence base, it was compelling, it was irrefutable. Child poverty in our country is not a myth. We realised too that poverty damages children. So for New Zealand, the New Zealand child living in poverty is more likely to die during infancy or childhood, is twice as likely to be admitted to hospital for acute infectious diseases, is less likely to have fruit and vegetables, more likely to miss out on breakfast, less likely to take part in early childhood education, and less likely to leave school with entry-level qualifications to skilled employment. So many in our countries are saying, we want to prevent child poverty happening, we want to turn the tide. So we've come to a decision point of fundamental importance, a decision point that we have to understand, that has to do with how we understand ourselves as nations. Do we accept child poverty as unavoidable? Or do we decide child poverty is preventable? If it is unavoidable, then the task in terms of policy is to minimise harm by number and by degree. If child poverty is to be understood as preventable, then the policy task is to deliberately adopt a child-centred focus, find out what causes child poverty and child well-being, and intentionally set out to support the reduction and elimination of child poverty. And to do that, we need the second action, and that's to agree on a shared definition of child poverty. And it is important to have the clear definition of child poverty so that there's a common purpose and agreed goals. The definition we used in the expert advisory group was consistent with international approaches to help us compare ourselves with other countries. So we said child poverty is about children. We've got that sorted first. Child poverty is about children. Children who experience deprivation of material resources and income, leaving them unable to enjoy their rights and achieve their full potential. It's a definition that puts children at the centre. So any policy actions that follow from that to do with household income, employment, health, are actually about meeting the needs of children. And it's the systems level definition, and it helps with setting goals at government level. This approach aligns with that of UNICEF's Inocente Research Centre, which maintains that poverty is not an inevitable situation, but susceptible to government policy. Now, that's the systems level definition, but what does it look like on a day-to-day basis when you're trying to explain it to somebody and you've got between level 2 and level 6 in the lift to talk about what you've been about? Well, on a day-to-day basis, one-on-one with children in schools, I base it on them and ask if they have the essentials. Do you have warm winter clothes? Do you have sturdy shoes that aren't worn out? Do you have access to the doctor, a separate bed, the opportunity to take part in school trips and sports, do you have fresh fruit and vegetables? Do you live in a house that isn't damp or mouldy but warm in winter? And if the answer to many of these is no, then this is potentially a child missing out on essentials and potentially deprived. And it's interesting, this notion of deprived or poor or poverty. And it sat well with me technically as an analyst, though it didn't sit well with me either. And I realised that when I went out in the consultation phase. I realised that we actually needed the third action, a strengths-based approach. So when we were consulting on the report, I travelled to Napier, and some of you may have been there in the North Island. And there in the Hawke's Bay, I met with a group called Pacifica. That's with a C rather than a K, which is how sometimes it's spelt. And that's a nationwide network of Pacifica women working to strengthen their communities. So the room was not quite as large as this one, but, it had a diverse group with mamas and younger ones from Tongan, Niue, Tokelau, Tahitian, Māori, Cook Islands, Fiji, ancestry. And I gave this really stellar eight-slide PowerPoint presentation on the state of child poverty in New Zealand and in Pacifica communities. And my statistics and my pie graphs slid and rose and shone, and my bullet points fired, and I was able to show that, like Māori children, Pacifica children are overrepresented in the child statistics for poverty in New Zealand, at 60% not living in poverty, but 40% of Pacifica children living in poverty. And it was a brilliant presentation. And at the end, I asked for questions and comments. And there was this worrying silence. And in Pacifica gatherings, there's noise until there's not noise. And there was the silence. And then from the second row from the back, a mama said, "Thank you." And then she said she didn't like anything about what I'd suggested. She made it clear that linking poverty to Pacifica peoples is deeply uncomfortable. She made it clear that linking poverty to Pacifica peoples is insulting for many from these diverse communities. Doing so is not necessarily accepted as relevant by Pacifica peoples. So the fact is that the statistics say 40% of those with my ancestry are living in poverty. But the fact is that most Pacifica families, and therefore their children, do not actually live in conditions of poverty. And my brilliant PowerPoint presentation had, in the focus on neediness, omitted to reflect the very strengths. And there was a concern expressed at that meeting that stereotypes will be built and then reinforced by linking poverty to neediness to Pacifica peoples. Yes, said one. It's about deprivation rather than poverty. It's about our strengths being the foundation for addressing the needs that we know are there in our communities. So I took the message on board. I went back to my colleagues in the expert advisory group. And the message was that policy messages and measures used for child poverty need to capture the distinct population groups' own worldviews alongside the complexity and the context of the issue. How we shape up solutions and actions needs to intentionally work to shatter stereotypes, needs to focus on actual needs, not assumptions, and needs to draw on the strengths of these communities. And I commend ACOSS and the researchers who have been building up the evidence base of the actuals, because this presents an opportunity for strengths-based, evidence-based examination of the actual needs. So, however we describe child poverty, this is a time of transitions, from children experiencing relative deprivation to children experiencing shared levels of well-being. And the solutions may well be unexpected. So when we look at our communities, the fourth possible area for action, the approach is to grow the power of communities in education. When I was growing up in the family of 5 children, which I thought was a large family, until I met my husband, and he comes from a family of 12, and his father came from a family of 22, one mother. I remember when things got a little bit difficult, and we ended up moving away and being with Mum. And she worked really hard. My mum was just an amazing, amazing mother. And as busy as things were, there came a time when I was about 12 when I was able to have a weekend away with my mum, just me. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was the only time that I was going to have 2 days away of just me with my mum. So we got in the Holden station wagon, and we took off from Christchurch inland to a place called Benmore Dams, and we had a look at there, and then we went for a walk up to a hut, and we stayed in the hut. And the next morning, we tidied up the hut. I tidied up the hut, and I said to Mum, "How's this looking, Mum? It's as good as we found it." And Mum looked around and she said, "Sweetheart, it's important that when we leave a place, we leave it better than we found it." And then she set to and helped me to make it better than we'd first found it. And that for me has been a key motivation for working in education. And when I work with communities in education, I continue to get the hope that things are going to be possible. It is going to be possible to change. And just like sunshine comes to Sydney and sunshine comes to Auckland every now and then, change can come when communities and education work together. What we do in education, though, can't solve the problem of child poverty on its own, but it can have a powerful impact on the lives of children living in financially disadvantaged circumstances. Issues in education include access to quality early childhood education, making sure children come to school with food in their bellies, achievement in schooling and tertiary, transition to employment, and solutions include focusing on quality teacher education for our early childhood teachers, pay parity in the early childhood sector, providing for participation and achievement on parity levels in schooling and tertiary sectors. It is like we heard this morning about getting to a level playing field. And I can't overstate the importance of early childhood education as really the rock bed for further solutions addressing child poverty. From an education perspective, it's about providing for strong early cognitive and social development for all our children. And in New Zealand, we do have a government situation where we have set participation and targets, and we've got until 2016 to increase participation in early childhood from 94%, our current state, to 98%. And there's variations by population groups of how that's going. But it has created a tremendous focus. So when the expert advisory group looked at the education initiatives underway, we realised that there was a gap in policy thinking because education side of things were focused on achievement and participation largely. So we wanted to focus on the quality, focus on those things that the education sector can do to mitigate the effects of poverty on children. So, the report includes the recommendation that government progress the current Ministry of Education work program to raise the quality of existing early childhood services and increase the supply of early childhood services to low-income families. Something that's very specific, because we know from the research that the benefits of good quality early childhood education are immense and can mitigate the effects of poverty and risks for children. What does that look like then on the ground when we get early childhood thriving alongside our communities? Well, on December the 6th, I'm going to go through to West Auckland, as I do each year at that time of the year, and I'll be sitting in a community gathering for the Leata-ata Tupulunga Aonga Mata, which is the Leata-ata Full Immersion Samoan Early Childhood Centre over in West Auckland. And the little ones, the 4+ ones, will be sitting to one side, and they'll be dressed in gold satin academic robes and gold satin mortarboards with little tassels, and they'll be getting ready to graduate to go to primary school. Now, at the Leata-ata Centre, which has been running for a while and has trained teachers who are paid on a par with primary school teachers, the parents have got excited, and so they have wanted to have their children going to early childhood centre in this area of relative low income more often. And to get them there, some of them have wanted to travel, bring their children across. We have terrible public transport in Auckland, so cars are actually really important. For many of the parents to do that, they need their licences. For them to do that, they need to improve their adult literacy, their literacy. And so when the children graduate on the 6th of December, before they go across the little podium, the little stage, the parents who have passed their certificate in literacy and achieved their driver's licence so that their children can come to the centre will also be recognised. And the government agencies that now come to the centre because the parents are there and provide budget advice, access to health information, access to information about benefits, the careers advisors who come, the schools that connect with the Early Childhood Centre to help with the transition, they will be there as well. So Leata-ata becomes something of a hub, and literacy for adults becomes meaningful because it's connected to my child. It has a context and a purpose and therefore motivation, and we celebrate. We celebrate. That's what it looks like when we have the action in the micro for the macro area of improving education outcomes for the children. The fifth area is listening to our children, because children and young people actually have some brilliant ideas about poverty and solutions. So for our report, we asked for the help of children, and some 300 children came and gave their thoughts, most being between 8 and 17 years of age. And the overarching message from the children is that they want to be involved in the solutions. They don't see being poor, these ones that we spoke with, as limiting, although they do see other children being mean and putting other kids down who don't have things. And I find it quite hard to share everything of what the children talked about, because we from God's Own, we like to focus on our sense that 3 out of 4 of our children are growing up warm and fed and clothed, and they have choices and support. And it's pretty hard because we have to somehow admit that we've let 1 out of 4 down. It's hard because then I get to hear the stories about children who are anxious about completing their schooling because they're actually at home caring for the siblings because mum and dad are out working their third job and somebody needs to be with the younger ones. And it's pretty hard because I then hear about children in New Zealand, in my country, talking about living in damp, cold, run-down, dirty, rat-infested and overcrowded houses in my first world country. I'd like to change the stories so that they don't say, we have no money, we're given the dumb houses, we live in the broken down ones. And I think we could change the story. I think we could change the story if we listen to the children, because they actually have some ideas about making sure families can live in dry, warm homes. When we listened to the children, one of them said, let's make all the houses damp-free, get the smokers out, get them warm and mould-free. What about if all houses have a warrant of fitness, like cars? Houses should have a warrant of fitness. There was the policy solution. And it's in the recommendations, and there's work now happening a year on to get warrants of fitnesses in our state homes and into the rental sector as well. A little bit of pushback on that. This is a New Zealand where children imagine homes having more money coming in so that there's clothing, there's opportunities to take part in sports, there's healthy food, and they see mum and dad having good jobs, not just the crap ones that are the first ones that get dropped off in hard times, but these are good paying jobs. And some of the children talked about having good food solutions. We could have free fruit, said one. We could have schools starting to grow their own fruit trees. And that's what's happening. Victory Primary in Nelson has formed something of a village, and they have an orchard. They have the school common area for vegetables and fruit growing. And they have the agencies that come in because the parents are there. And that means that the parents don't have to travel far to get advice and support. So all of these things come together, and they still need the plan. They still need the national strategy to turn the tide on child poverty. And we can be really heartened in both Australia and New Zealand by something of the growing understanding of the harmful impact of child poverty and the amount of energy, the resilience that's shown by so many across our countries. And that's where it means that we now have this optimal moment to take that sixth action, and that is to support, to call for, to advocate for a national strategy to reduce child poverty. Our governments have a key role in driving change and improving accountability for reducing child poverty. In New Zealand, 1 year on from the EAG's recommendations, we have published a progress report, and both that report and the first one are available online. The progress we have seen in the short period is pleasing. We've got some initiatives in place like food in schools, the warrant of fitness is up and running. And while it's important to celebrate the achievements, we can't lose sight of the huge task still ahead. So we've got something of an organic strategy emerging, but now's the time to shape it up so that efforts are mutually reinforcing, there's no major gaps, and the collective impact is greater than the sum of individual initiatives. So we need something of a cohesive, coherent, anti-poverty strategy. So there is strong evidence that taking an investment approach to supporting better outcomes for young children will pay great dividends for our societies. A strategy for investing in children, which is a different way than government going to the media and saying we're going to have a strategy against child poverty because child poverty exists under our government, but a strategy for investing in children could include specific poverty reduction targets, comprehensive monitoring and reporting framework, building that into legislation so it has credibility and sustainability, and adopting specific targets that ensure underserved students achieve parity with other children. Attached to the targets is accountability. So now, as I move into concluding, let me see if I can combine paddling with philosophy and pragmatics. Yes, I am someone who has been making friends with the sea. And last year, even though I'm a freshwater girl, I kayaked across the Cook Strait. Why, I was asked, would you do that? Where I was sitting. I said limply, oh, the ferry wasn't running. but to do that, I had to learn about tides and swells, the moon, geography. And I did also connect too with something from, I think, many of our own ancestors, of what it meant for our past ones to put ourselves on the ocean and to journey intentionally on these tidal waves. So my paddle buddy, Tara Remington, and I, we took off just 2 single kayaks on one of the world's most dangerous waterways. I had my little bike lamp in the front here, and I borrowed a friend's and put it on the back here. I had lots of other really important technical things, but it was a real privilege, such a privilege. And when we started out in the pre-dawn dark, the tide was going out. By midway, I think it was 4 hours, and midway through the channel, the tides were slack, which is what we'd planned for. And then they turned, and we were able to use that to help us go forward to the South Island. So turning the tide, the theme for this forum, is actually very literal to me, turning the tide. So I've thought a lot about the title for this forum and wondered, is it possible? Is it actually possible turning the tide? And I believe it is. I believe it is if what you are about is big enough and influential enough. I mean moon kind of big. I mean planetary orbits kind of big when it comes to influence. So I came here to say that. I came here to say that turning the tide is possible if you believe, if what you believe and your actions are big and influential. And those are 2 really technical terms. So let me recast my 6 suggestions as questions for checking the necessary magnitude of mindset and policy actions. Have we decided that child poverty is preventable? Do we have a shared definition of child poverty with the child at the centre? Have we adopted a strengths-based approach? Are we working to strengthen our communities and education, particularly in that early childhood space? Have we listened, truly listened, to children? And have we established a national plan to reduce child poverty with the associated targets and with the associated accountabilities? It's a lot to ask, I know, but we do have to do this. Here's my poem. It comes from the Tongan New Zealander, actually, not myself, Carlo Mila. And she talks about how we are and have to be the ones we are called to be. Her poem is about oceans, ocean journey, and resonates of the intelligence and courage of our ancient ones who crossed oceans and seaways intelligently, intentionally, and repeatedly. And when I read Carlo's words, it sounds to me as if we are talking as strong, intelligent peoples, we're talking to government and we're asking government to use their influence with urgency and a willingness on their part and ours to be of service to children, the children of the waka, the waka, the canoe, the nation that we call home. When I read Carlo's words, I think of the thousands of children within ACOSS, and I think of the mandate that gives ACOSS to speak as ones of influence. I think of how we have been called to be the ones to make sure that no one is left behind, no little one is left behind, educationally, socially, economically. And that's how we all become who we were meant to be. We become the nation we are meant to be when all have the chance to thrive. And as we become the nation we are meant to be, we stand alongside all other nations becoming who they are meant to be. So here's some of her poem. Io, it is true. We do not have a generation to waste. You have the blade of your paddle. Te a koe rai te rapa I toi. I have the blade of mine. Are there safe hands on our waka to hold these children? We don't leave anyone behind. We will be the people that we've been called to be because we are the ones we've been waiting for. At the heart of a healthy society lies the success and health of its children. In both Australia and New Zealand, opportunity, fulfilling potential, and caring for our young are foundational principles of our societies. Yet what many of our children experience is far from the best. The thing is, though, that there's no one else who can do what's needed to make things better. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Kia ora koutou. Thank you.